Good morning and welcome to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA, hour number 3, the final hour of the week. And what a day it's been, and what a day it's going to be here as we have our next guest coming up, and he is Dr. Charles Krauthammer. He's the winner of the Pulitzer Prize, named by the Financial Times as the most influential commentator in America today. Since 1985, he's written a syndicated column for the Washington Post, for which he won the 1987 Pulitzer Prize for distinguished commentary. He's a contributing editor to the Weekly Standard and a weekly columnist, or panelist rather, on the Inside Washington show. He also is a contributor. Many of you see him every night on Fox News, appearing nightly on Special Report with Brett Baer. And he is also the author of a great book that's out there, Things That Matter, 3 Decades of Passions, Pastimes, and Politics. And it was number 1 for 10 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It currently resides at number 15. And with that, we welcome Dr. Charles Krauthammer to our show. Dr. Krauthammer, an honor to have you, sir.
Pleasure to be with you.
All the different things that you've been noted for here, we could probably take up a segment just naming off what you've done. I'm going to kind of mix those in. But one of the things that really stood out to me is the fact that you're also a member of the Chess Journalists of America. And I was wondering, from your particular ability at playing chess, how many chess players do you think we have in the White House and in the Congress?
I think they play checkers. I think a lot of them play dominoes. I think you've got the Iranians and the Russians have been playing chess, and I'm not sure our side has been up to it.
I think one of the things that bothers a lot of us right now is the fact that, chess involves intended and unintended consequences as you think 4, 5, 6, 7 moves ahead, maybe more. And it doesn't seem to us that in a lot of the policies that we see today that there is any kind of thinking of the unintended consequences or the intended ones, is there?
No, I think it's a very good point. I mean, you see it most starkly in foreign policy, where the Russians have in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, now in Ukraine, they're always several moves ahead of this administration. And, of course, you see it in domestic policy. Most starkly, you see it, of course, in Obamacare, where every day it seems we're waking up to some other consequence of this monstrous 2,200-page bill that nobody anticipated and that all of a sudden is upon us.
When you look at President Obama right now, I hear a lot of people say, President Clinton most notably, former President Clinton said he's an amateur. I've heard him called a Manchurian candidate. Is he those things or is he something else in your mind?
Well, I think it's easy to go a bit overboard with Obama. And, in the book I have several chapters on him, and I really do think it's important to make a distinction. I don't think, and I think it's kind of way out there to have this conspiracy theory about Obama. Obama is a liberal. He's far more liberal than, say, a Bill Clinton was. Bill Clinton was kind of moderate, center-left, and there's nothing center about Obama. But I think he's quite sincere. He told us in the first State of the Union address, 5 weeks after he was sworn in 2009, that he was there to change America. And he was going to do it with health care. That's Obamacare, energy, cap and trade, although he failed on that, and education, which, of course, is the future. That's a pretty ambitious agenda. In the book I have a chapter, remember that famous statement he made, if you're successful, if you have a business, you didn't build it, somebody else did, meaning, of course, the government. And I try to analyze that as really the classic view of a left liberal, or in Europe, you'd call him a social democrat, and why, how that contrasts with a conservative view, which is, of course, nobody acts alone in society. But for a liberal, what counts is the government, whereas for a conservative, what counts is all the other great institutions that shape your life that are not government. That's family and church and community and PTA. And, all the organizations, the voluntary associations Americans are famous for. Even Tocqueville talked about that. And that, I think, is the fundamental difference between left and right. They don't value these other institutions. And the great big Leviathan state ends up squeezing out these wonderful other institutions that ought to be the ones to shape you.
You alluded to the fact the president said he's going to fundamentally change America. I taught history for 25 years before I got into this business, and I always thought our country's been resilient to good or bad presidents or Congresses. But today I wonder if this group of legislators and leaders are damaging the country through fundamentally changing our ideas and I think you alluded to that a moment ago, they've been really cornerstones of America. Your thoughts?
No, I think that's a very good point, and I think there's a lot of concern among traditional or conservative Americans that when you get something like Obamacare, or you get this gigantic increase in the number of people on food stamps, when you've got more than half of Americans dependent on some kind of government handout, when you've extended unemployment insurance for 5 years when it was meant to be just a stopgap, and then when you get Jay Carney saying earlier this week in an astonishing statement, when the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, reported that Obamacare would lead to about 2 million jobs being, 2 million fewer jobs in America, as people could decide, well, I'm not going to work, I'll just get my health insurance through government subsidies. And Jay Carney said, well, this is a real form of opportunity. We're giving people the opportunity to decide whether or not to work. I mean, that's unbelievable. You know, when you think of opportunity, you're trying to give people the opportunity to work, climb the ladder, to better themselves. And what Carney was saying is the liberal ideal is that we give you the opportunity to be idle. Well, of course, anybody can choose to do that, but with a twist, to be idle and then to live off the subsidies of people who actually work. And I think that's sort of a rather fundamental admission about the kind of dependency that liberalism actually creates. And I think it was a very inadvertent admission of the essence of liberalism.
I see where different people have said you're the most important conservative voice in America today. People like Mr. Brooks with the New York Times says you're the most important conservative columnist. And yet, you've been given awards from the American Way, which is a famously liberal group, presented your First Amendment Award. You have the Conservative Bradley Foundation, which awarded you $250,000 Bradley Prize, which I'm sure was much appreciated as well. But so you're not a guy that just is bound up in something conservative. You know, one of the things we talk about a lot of times, we get so caught up in labels sometimes and keeping score that we forget that, hey, we're supposed to think on our own and try to figure things out along the way. You've also been a speechwriter for Walter Mondale. You worked in the Carter administration. So you've kind of seen the whole gamut here a little bit, haven't you?
I have. And I think one of the reasons the book has done so well and has gotten so many fans is because it is not doctrinaire. It is not very, it's not very predictable. And I think there are a lot of things in the book, the way I deal with affirmative action, with capital punishment, with embryonic research. I mean, all the great issues of our time, the social issues. I try to come at it in ways that I try to be refreshed and unconventional. And I think that's sort of part of the appeal. The other part, I think, is that in the beginning of the book, I have a very long original introduction that's quite autobiographical. I generally don't write about myself because I don't find the subject terribly interesting. But I made an exception for the book because I figure after 30 years in the business, I might as well say a little bit. And in part, it is what you mentioned. Walter Mondale, Jimmy Carter. I was a speechwriter for Walter Mondale when he was vice president in 1980. And I did start out life, my youth, as a Great Society Democrat. And then I talk about in the autobiographical chapter, I write about my evolution from left to right. And it's not that I woke up one morning and the clouds parted and the shaft of life came down, and the Lord spaketh unto me from on high,
right,
and said, behold, Ronald Reagan. It's that over time I began to change my views. And in the introductory chapter, I talk precisely about what it was that made me change and how that happened over about 10 or 15 years. 2001
to 2006, you also served on the President's Council on Bioethics. You know, we talk about ethics in our country today, and we talk about bioethics and the ending of life and abortion and, you know, ending people's lives at the end. Your thoughts on all that? I mean, life to a lot of us is still very, very precious out there, and yet we seem to have some legitimately gray areas there that we talk about regularly.
Well, there are two parts to that. The first is that I started out life not just as a liberal, but as a doctor. So I was, when I was young, I was at Harvard Medical School, and then I was the chief resident in psychiatry at the Massachusetts General Hospital. An interesting preparation for being a political analyst in Washington. But anyways, I talk about, the introduction also talks about not just my ideological evolution, but my sort of vocational, how and why I left medicine to become a writer, to become engaged in politics. But I think because I did spend those 7 years in medicine, that it helped to sensitize me and to inform me. And there were several chapters in the book on precisely the issues you raised, the bioethical issues, assisted suicide. There's a chapter on there about the experience in Holland and where that is left. I write about the question of stem cell research, embryonic research. Are you allowed to do it? Should you be allowed to do it? And I did serve on the President's Council of Bioethics for 7 years, where we talked about that, we wrote about that. And in fact, there's a long essay in the book that is taken from the part of the report that I wrote, and in which I deal with the question of human cloning. So all of these issues are rather close to me because I live them. Actually, I'm still licensed as a physician. Not that I practice, but, and I have a column that came out this morning in the Washington Post, and that's online on healthcare issues and healthcare myths. So that's sort of one part of my life that I have kept going, and it has a fairly prominent part in the book as well.
And the name of the book, again, is Things That Matter, 3 Decades of Passions, Pastimes, and Politics. You'll see it on just about every shelf in every bookstore in the country. Congratulations on the success of it, Dr. Krauthammer. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. Yes, it's been quite unexpected that 10 weeks in a row at number one. I've had to yield the number one spot to Bob Gates, but it's only temporary.
Now, you're going to be coming to York on February 26th to the Strand. I'm looking forward to being able to have a question and answer period with you again. And I know a lot of people are really anticipating you coming here. And your thoughts about coming to town here to speak that night?
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. Fortunately, York and Washington are not that far apart. So I'm going to jump in the car and come on up. We'll miss special report, but I think they'll understand. And I really do enjoy the give and take. I'll be giving a talk of about a half hour to 45 minutes about the insanity going on in Washington. And then the part I like the best, and I think the audience likes best, is we have a pretty wide open question and answer period, and that's when we can have a lot of fun.
And we're looking forward to that as well. And a final thought about America right now. A lot of people are worried about America's health. What would you say to them?
I'm very optimistic. I know it sounds odd because conservatives think that we're going to hell in a handbasket. We probably are, but I'm having a good time anyway. But no, I'm optimistic about America because I do think that in the end there's a fantastic resilience. It's not just in our spirit, but in our sort of political instincts. The country does not allow itself to wander into the cul-de-sacs like Europe did, to fascism and communism and socialism and sort of the self-destructive impulses. We really have this sort of Native American sense. Of course, immigrants absorb that Americanness, which is self-reliance, things that we can do, not wanting the government to be the nanny state. I think we're at a crucial point where the country has to decide, are we going to become an entitlement state like Europe, or are we going to be a state like we are now, where you have a safety net to help the helpless, but the rest of us are out there to compete, to flourish, and to be our best. We have the Constitution, we have the history, we have the courage, and we have the examples of the past to lead us. And I've always thought there's something providential about American history, and I think that that continues. I remain optimistic, despite the discouragement people would feel just looking at a snapshot view of what's going on today.
Dr. Krauthammer, an honor having you with us today. I look forward to meeting you on the 26th. And again, people need to get out and buy that book right now, Things That Matter, 3 Decades of Passions, Pastimes, and Politics. An honor having you here this morning, sir.
It's been a great pleasure.
My honor. You take care.
See you in York.
See you in York.